Well, welcome to this week's Q on Q. We are glad you are with us again this time. Well, if you're listening when this first airs, I hope that you and your family had the most blessed Easter. We got together with family and took some time to kind of have a little downtime, and we did catch some theater along with a passion play from one of our local churches that was just incredible. It's always incredible to see the days throughout the Easter story played out. Really gives you a new perspective on keeping the focus of the season where it belongs. Well, things with my voice are still chugging along, about how they were. I've had a few small coughing fits here and there, and today's my first day back from break to school, and took a lot out of it this morning. But I appreciate your continued prayers as I go through this issue and as it gets treated, and as well for my upcoming doctor appointment in a few weeks. Well, last time we talked about something that a lot of us feel but don't always name, the idea that sometimes it's not that something is wrong with us, it's that we might be in the wrong room or at the wrong place. That there are environments that reflect who we are clearly and others that quietly distort it. And if we're not paying attention, we can start to internalize that distortion and assume that our value has somehow changed. But here's where that conversation naturally leads to next. If a room can influence how we feel about our worth, then it raises a deeper question. What actually determines it? Because if our sense of value is being shaped by environments, reactions, or outcomes, then it's probably not as stable as we'd like to believe and probably leads to some questions about our spiritual integrity. Well, if we're honest, most of us live life with that instability more than we realize. We know our worth. We should know our value. But we have days that things go well and days that don't. Days that go well where we feel productive, effective, even noticed by people. In those moments, we start to feel confident, like we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, like we're bringing something meaningful to the table. But it doesn't take much for that to shift for us on the surface. Just one off day, one comment, one moment where something doesn't land the way we expected. And suddenly, that confidence feels a little more fragile. We start second guessing ourselves, replaying things in our minds, wondering if we're actually as capable as we thought we were just a few hours earlier. And that kind of swing back and forth between confidence and doubt isn't always just something on the surface that we feel for a moment. It's often a sign of something deeper. Not that we're overly emotional or inconsistent, but that the way we are measuring our worth might be tied too closely to what's happening around us, that we've unintentionally built our sense of value on something that moves. So, before I go any further, that's really the question we need to sit with today. What am I using to measure my worth? Because if we don't define that clearly, we'll spend a lot of our lives chasing something that never was meant to hold that kind of weight. If you start paying attention to that question, what am I using to measure my worth? You'll start to notice most of us are operating out of what I like to call one of two systems. And the tricky part is we don't always consciously choose which one. We drift into whichever thing is being reinforced around us the most. The first one is the one we're all most familiar with because it's everywhere. It's the cultural way of measuring value. It sounds like this. What did I accomplish today? Did I get enough done? Did I perform well? And then right behind that comes another layer. Who noticed? Did anyone affirm that? Did I get recognized? And whether we admit it or not, there's always a third piece quietly running in the background. How do I stack up compared to everyone else? None of those questions are inherently bad on their own. They can even be helpful in the right context. But the problem is when they stop being tools for evaluation and start becoming the foundation for our identity. Because if your worth is tied to performance, if it's tied to visibility, if it's tied to comparison, then it will always feel like something you have to keep proving. There's another way to think about it, though, a deeper foundation that doesn't shift. Instead of starting with performance, it starts with identity. Not what did I do today, but who am I, regardless of what today looked like. It's a different kind of question, and it takes a little more intention to sit with because it's not driven by immediate results. From there, it moves into something even more grounding, the idea of creation, reflecting on how I was made by my Heavenly Father with intention, with a calling here on this earth. Reflecting on that, something inherently valuable about who I am, not because of what I produce, just because I exist. And then there's purpose, not just in the sense of achievement or milestones, but in the sense that your life carries meaning beyond what can be measured in a single day or a single outcome. That what you're building, who you're becoming, and how you're living actually matters, even when it's not visible or immediately rewarded. Here's the tension, though. Most people, if you ask them directly, would say they believe in that second system. They believe their worth isn't just about performance or recognition, and they believe that they've been built uniquely their own with a calling on this earth. But when you look at how we actually respond to success and failure, most of us are living inside the first one. And until that gap closes, our sense of worth will always feel a little unsettled. The challenge with this isn't usually obvious, it's subtle. You don't wake up one day and decide, I'm going to base my worth on performance today. It happens gradually. Somewhere along the way, you shift from simply showing up and doing what you're called to do to quietly tracking how you're doing, keeping that running score in your mind. And it shows up in really normal, everyday moments. You have a great class, a strong meeting, a meaningful conversation, and you walk away thinking, I'm doing great. There's a sense of confidence, even a little relief. But then something small goes the other way. Maybe it's one comment, one critique, one moment that just doesn't land the way you thought it would. And suddenly, the internal dialogue shifts to, maybe I'm not as good as I thought. When I read that statement, I think about a little over a year ago, I had a class that I taught that I gave a reflection to. And at the end of the class, I asked them to rate the teacher. Yes, I know that's hard for my teacher friends out there to hear. I asked the class to rate my knowledge of the class content from 0 to 10. And I got mostly 9s and 10s, which made me feel really good, but I got a 4 from one student. And when I read the comment kind of hit me personally at first. And I could have had that same reflection as I just shared in that previous thought. I thought the class went great. It seemed like everybody really enjoyed it and went really well. Then there was that one student, the one that I missed that reflection on, that somehow I missed the mark on. Well, over time, that can create a pattern. You can start looking for signs to tell you how you're doing, not just in your work, but in your worth. And without realizing it, approval becomes something you depend on. Not in a dramatic way, but in a steady way, a quiet way. You start to feel its absence just as much as its presence. And when it's not there, something feels off. That's when outcomes start to carry more weight than they were ever meant to. A good result doesn't just mean something went well. It starts to feel like proof that you are valuable. And a bad result doesn't just mean something needs adjustment. It starts to feel like evidence that something is wrong or something is lacking in us. The line between what you do and who you are starts to blur. And when worth becomes performance based, peace becomes temporary. It comes and goes with the results. It's there when things are going well and it disappears when they're not. But a life built that way will always feel unsettled because you're asking something unstable to give you something steady. Maybe that's the clearest sign that something deeper needs to shift. Not your effort, not your responsibility, but your foundation. Because if your sense of worth has to be continually proven, it will always feel like something you could lose. And that's not the kind of foundation that leads to a grounded, steady life. It's the kind that keeps you striving, even when you're already enough. There's a real emotional cost to living this way, even if it looks fine on the surface. When things go well, it's easy for your confidence to rise. Sometimes it rises a little too much. You start to believe that success defines you. I must be doing great. I'm exactly where I should be. And then things don't go well, and they won't always, and you feel that drop just as quickly. Maybe I'm not who I thought I was. That back and forth creates instability that's really exhausting to carry. You're not just responding to situations, you're constantly recalibrating your identity based on them. One moment you feel steady, and the next, you're questioning everything. Over time, that emotional swing wears on you in ways that are hard to explain, but very real to live through. From a deeper perspective, it makes sense why that feels so off. If your worth is meant to be something steady, something rooted beyond outcomes, then tying it to performance will always feel unsettled. You end up asking temporary things to give you something permanent, and they just can't hold it. Even the best days aren't strong enough to sustain that kind of pressure because at the end of the day, an unstable definition of worth will always create an unstable life. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're building on something that was never meant to carry that weight in the first place. So, this is where the shift begins. Not in what you do, but in how you understand what's already true. What if your worth isn't something you achieve, but something you receive? Not something you build over time based on performance, but something that was established long before you ever had the chance to prove anything. Because if you zoom out for a moment, our faith speaks clearly to this. You were known before you performed. I want to say that again. You were known before you performed. Before you had a role, a title, a list of accomplishments, there was already intention behind your life. You weren't put together randomly. You were formed thoughtfully, specifically, with design. And that means your value didn't begin when you started producing. And it doesn't disappear when you fall short. There's something really grounding about that if you really let it sink in for a minute. It means your worth isn't fragile. It's not dependent on whether today goes well or not. It's not something that increases when you succeed or decreases when you struggle. It's something that's already been established. And your life becomes less about proving it and more about living from it. That's where the reframe happens. Worth isn't something you prove. It gets revealed through how you live, how you serve, how you grow, how you respond. Your actions matter. Your effort matters. But they're not auditioning you for value. They're expressions of something that's already been placed inside you. And that doesn't mean effort goes away. It doesn't mean you stop caring, stop growing, or stop striving to do things well. It just means that the pressure shifts. You're no longer working to become valuable. You're working from a place that already has more value than you can imagine. And that changes the tone of everything. It replaces anxiety with steadiness. It replaces shifting with firmness. It replaces proving with purpose. Practically, this starts to show up in small but important ways. You stop reevaluating yourself every time something goes well or poorly. A bad day doesn't send you into a spiral of questioning who you are. It stays what it is, a bad day. Something to learn from, something to move through. It doesn't get to rewrite who you are. And on the other side, a win doesn't suddenly become the new measuring stick for worth. You can celebrate it, appreciate it, even be proud of it, but you don't need it to validate you. You're not holding on to it as proof that you matter. You're simply recognizing it as a moment within a much bigger picture. I think there's also a level of awareness that starts to grow. We start to catch these moments when we're tempted to attach our identity to an outcome. Something doesn't go well, and your first instinct is to take it personally. Instead of immediately reacting, you pause. You take a step back. You remind yourself what's actually true before you let that moment define you. Because at the end of the day, this is the distinction that holds everything together. What you do matters, but it's not who you are. And when you begin to live from that place, you don't just become more stable, you become more free. So, as we start to bring this into the home stretch here, I want to pay a visit back to the idea that it really comes back to awareness. Not pressure, not urgency, but honest reflection. Because if you've been measuring your worth based on performance or outcomes or how others respond to you, that pattern won't disappear overnight. It has to be noticed, named, identified before it can be changed. And a good place to start is with a few simple but honest questions. When do I feel most valuable? And what's driving that feeling? Is it when things go well? When I'm being recognized? When I feel ahead or affirmed? And on the other side, what kind of moments make you question yourself the fastest? Because those reactions reveal what you've been using as your measuring system. You might also ask yourself, do I treat success like proof and failure like disqualification? Ooh, that one stings a little bit. Do you allow good moments to define you in a positive way, but the hard moments define you in a negative one? Because if both are true, your sense of worth is still tied to something that moves, and that's what's keeping things feeling unstable. So here's where this becomes practical. Start catching those moments in real time. When something goes well, enjoy it, but don't let it elevate your identity. When something doesn't go well, learn from it, but don't let it diminish who you are. Create a small pause between what happens and what you tell yourself about it, because that pause is where your perspective begins to shift. It might also look like intentionally grounding yourself in truth before your day even starts. Remind yourself, maybe in a quick word of prayer on your way to work, that your worth, your value is not on trial today. Thank God for what He's put in you. And ask Him to guard you. Ask Him to give you strength. Remind yourself that you're not stepping into a day to prove something, but to live from something that's already been given to you. Boy, that one shift alone can change how you carry everything else. Because if you don't define what determines your worth, your environment will do it for you. And as we've already talked about, not every environment reflects you clearly. Which is why the next step in this conversation, which we'll get into next time, matters so much. Because once you begin to understand your worth more clearly, the natural question becomes about knowing the purpose behind where you've been placed. We'll get into that really, really deep discussion next time. But for now, thank you for tuning in this week. Remember who you've been created to be, and thank God for it every day. Remember your worth, remember your value, and don't let the world define who you are. That's all for this week's episode of Q on Q. I really do appreciate you tuning in. See you back here next time when we'll have more for you on Q.